Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's PestFacts WA webinar. This webinar is being delivered as part of the GRDC co-funded DPIRD Seasonal Status of Pests and Diseases Delivered to Growers project. My name is Cindy Webster, and I'm the PestFacts WA newsletter editor and project lead. I'm hosting the webinar today, and my colleague Jeanette Pratt is co-hosting. The Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development acknowledges the traditional custodians throughout Western Australia and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal community and their cultures, and to elders both past and present. In today's webinar, we have 3 senior research scientists from DPIRD sharing their expertise with us. First off, we'll have Ian Foster giving us the latest climate outlook for WA. Svetlana Micic will then be talking about what insect pest growers need to look out for at crop establishment. Andrea Hills will then be discussing green bridge and plant disease risk. And we'll then finish with a question and answer session. So please use the Q&A tool in this webinar to ask any questions that you may have. The webinar recording will be placed on the DPIRD YouTube channel afterwards, and we will be publishing the PowerPoint slides. The microphone and video camera for all attendees will be kept off for the webinar, so please do use the Q&A tool. And I'll now hand over to Ian.
Very good. Thank you, Cindy. I'll just do a quick recap of what happened last year for summer rain and what's been going on with the rain to date this year, and then rolling into the latest outlook for temperature and rainfall for this first part of the growing season, and also support it with some of the charts for predicted atmospheric pressure and sea surface temperatures. Next slide, please. So the first two on the left, just to recap, in November of last year, the Bureau of Met's outlook is the one on the top left, was looking at the chances of exceeding summer rain, that is December to February. The sort of greeny blue colours means it was expecting higher chances that period was likely to be wetter than average for that part of the world. So there's a lot of Eastern Australia expected to be quite wet within that period. The bit for southern WA, the southwest, the cropping area there, it's much more neutral sort of thing. So it could be dry, it could be wet. The model wasn't really saying much. The chart on the bottom is from a multi-model international system from Copernicus, which is a European site. Again, the bulk of the models were all expecting it to be wetter than average during that summer period. Next slide, please. And this is what happened. So this is just the December to February rainfall deciles, whereby anywhere that was average is white, anywhere that's blue was above average, and anywhere that's red, of course, you've guessed it already, was below average. Now, for Queensland, that's before the really big flooding rains. They did have coastal floods around Cairns and that sort of stuff. And you can see the influence of tropical cyclones for the Pilbara, but large areas of Australia, especially South Australia and those sorts of things, didn't get the wet conditions during that period that were expected. For the wider southwest area of WA, the red area then, since the traditional summer, December to February, was actually notably below average. And maybe it's not being unfair to the models. They expected it to be normal, perhaps wetter. So you can decide for yourself whether that's a forecast success or fail. Next slide, please. Now we're just looking at the rainfall over the longer dry season, or the longer warm season, from November last year to March of this year. So that's the decile map just for the Egg region, produced by Meredith Guthrie. Again, it uses the reference years since 1975. So it says for the bulk of the area, it's actually been a relatively normal rainfall. That is not much. Notably drier than average for much of the northern grain belt, and notably dry for parts of the south coast. You'll see a bit of rain near Albany. So that was from just the March rain itself, which we'll have a closer look at in a bit. The other bit, it was uniformly everywhere, just that it was very warm. That's the temperature deciles, maximum temperature deciles. So they're right at either setting new records or right at the top of the distribution. So if you thought it was a hot summer, well then, yes, it definitely was. Next slide, please. So looking at just the March rain, that's notable for cloud band that was affecting southwest, Great Southern, bits of the central and eastern grain belt, bits of the south coast. Didn't bring a lot for the northern grain belt. So that was, but particularly some heavy rains around the Albany area, and you know about that. That's all been in the media. Again, continued to be much warmer than average for March, which is the chart on the right. Next slide, please. So the other event, of course, that's been going on is that the first part of April has seen significant rain for the south, and the chart on the left shows the rainfall totals. Again, this is just for the first week of April, more or less, produced by Meredith. Since then, that has actually moved its way further eastward into the Esperance district. So quite heavy falls for a lot of areas of the southwest and Great Southern of, in some cases, up to 100 millimetres. So very much welcome in lots of those places. The chart on the right is from the Bureau of Meteorology. So that's the year-to-date rainfall percentages. That is anywhere that's about average for the year-to-date, has those sort of greeny colours on it, or wetter. Green, so Pilbara's been wetter for the year-to-date. You note most of the northern ag region, it's much drier than it would have been for the year-to-date. So again, they've been dry for the whole period. And you're seeing the south coast is an area that's now actually had a wetter start to the year. So they've already achieved the average to date from January to April. So that's the significance of the rain events, a little bit in March, but also this first part of April's put quite a lot of rain into the southern part of the state. Next slide, please. And so looking at just before that rain happened in April, the Bureau of Meteorology was putting out its monthly and 3-monthly rainfall outlooks. So this is a one for April. They ran on the issued on the 3rd of April. Again, it shows just the chance of exceeding median, and the model was most emphatic. This is an example of what they call an emphatic forecast, where the probabilities are really strong. And so it said, look, for the bulk of the state, according to the Bureau of Met's model, it was unlikely to be wetter than average. Now, we know if events a week later that forecast hasn't verified well for the south. It's actually been wetter than average. But for the rest of the state, it remains to be seen. There's not a hell of a lot of rain expected for the north to come. So we've already got first part of the outlook, certainly monthly stuff. It's got a lot wetter in the south than the model expected. Next one, please. So this is just looking at the 3-monthly period, April, May, June. And this largely shows the influence of the predicted dry April. So that whole period there, they're expecting it to be more likely dry than average. So the colour is a bit more muted than they were just for April. Next one, please. You step forward 1 month. So this just looks at May, June, July. So we see on this one, April's dropped out of it. And you can see the influence then April had on it. The colours are very neutral. So this is what you'd call a neutral outlook. That is, the model has no preferences, whether it to be wetter or drier. So whatever would normally happen in that period of time, that's your guidance. It's not making any estimate or changing the probabilities away from normal climatology. So that's potentially a good sign, because in 2023, it was painting that area quite brown. It was expected it to be drier. So even though that gives the impression it's saying nothing, it does tell you that your chances of, say, dry seasons are no more elevated than they would be normally. Next slide, please. The bit that is really changed, really different, are temperatures. So we're still running off the really warm summer. The chart on the left just shows the chances of getting unusually high minimum temperatures. That's nighttime temperatures. So that means amongst the highest 20%. And so the chance of that happening is sort of 3-4 times more than normal. And the chance of unusually high daytime temperatures during April to June is the same. So it's very much elevated that you'll see those really high-end temperatures. So that's been a consistent feature from these outlooks. Next slide, please. So some of the things that are driving these rainfall and temperature patterns, these are the predicted charts of mean sea level pressure. So this is a deviation from average. So where it's painted red, the models expect the pressure to be higher than average, and where it's the bluey colours, expect the pressure to be lower than average. So for April to June, on the left, your eyes are drawn to the two sort of bullseyes, I guess, of the higher pressures to the south of Australia. And the one southwest of WA is the one that was having the influence on the April to June outlook. You jump forward May to July and you see the pressure patterns change. The pressures are much closer to normal, and hence May to July rain relaxes back to normal. Still a high pressure in the South Pacific, but that's not a worry to us. That's all systems that have gone past us. So that seems to be the circulation issue that's driving this first part of the system. That is, these persistent high pressure systems earlier in the season that look as though it's going to relax back to normal from May onwards. So that's actually a good sign. Next one, please. So with sea surface temperatures, that's the other part of the story. And the chart on the left is the May to July predicted temperatures. Again, the deviations from average. your eye drawn to a couple of things. One, there's a lot of red everywhere, especially around the Australian region, like off Ningaloo, where the marine heat wave is still continuing, and within the Tasman Sea. The other thing that you note as well, that say in the Pacific Ocean basin, the colours are pretty much the same either side of it. It's a bit of a wishy-washy sort of a thing. And similarly in the tropical Indian Ocean. Traditionally, the predictability, that is over several months, that would come out of the season outlooks come if you've got a strong pattern within the ocean, especially those two basins. So if you don't get a strong pattern, even though it's warm in most parts of the basins, it just the models just relax back to a neutral outlook. The bit that then changes what actually happens is the red bits around Australia, and also the chart to the right, which just shows total global water vapour since the 1990s has been going up. So that's a climate change signal where you've got a warmer ocean and high evaporation rates. So what that means is that if you get a weather system that can extract rain from the air, you quite easily get very high rainfall rates, such as been happening in Queensland the last few weeks. The trick is you've got to get the weather systems to actually turn up. But if they do, you can get some surprises on the sort of the day-to-day basis. You can get much more rain than was expected. So that's one example of maybe why let's say, a more short-term effect blew up the April forecast in the Bureau of Met, where they simply got a lot more rain for the southwest than the models were actually expecting earlier on. Next slide, please. So just to summarise, it's been a really mixed summer rainfall across the southern part of the state, drier in the northern grain belt, and notably wetter over March and April for the south, and it's rolling through estimates at the moment. And the outlooks for the next week or so, it looks potentially some continuing more rain for the south coast. So the rain outlooks tend to be dry overall for April to June, heavily influenced by that April pattern, but they do seem to improve from May as the pressure patterns tend to relax. The other bit that's still been there since summer and will definitely be driving through into autumn and winter is that the temperatures are expected to be notably warmer than average. So that's going to drive some impacts as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. My take-home message from that is that we are expecting a warmer winter season, and based on that, that's something we're going to talk about, is because 2024 was a bit warmer than average, and we'll have a look at what happened last year. We'll also chat about the resident pests, so those pests we can expect to be present in our paddocks. And also we'll have a bit of a conversation about the FIFO pests, those ones that will fly in and fly out of our paddocks this year. Right, if we just have a look at the year that was. So by the 19th of July in 2024, PestFacts received 300 reports of pests throughout our broadacre growing regions. And if we break those down, we had over a third of those reports were actually of moths or caterpillars present in our broadacre growing regions, and they were mainly of native budworm and diamondback moth. About 50 of those reports were of DBM and 30 were of native budworm, present either in the same paddock or in separate paddocks. And the rest of the reports were of other caterpillar species like loopers and armyworm and a few others such as that. If we look at the reasons why, it's because we had a late start and it was quite warm. And what we had is the warmer the weather, the faster the life cycle. And it was interesting in the fact that we did find fall armyworm at Caballing. With a warmer than average season, this expected in 2025, we might be finding pests that we don't normally see in our part of the world. And just don't forget that the warmer it is, the quicker the life cycle is for these caterpillar pests. And last year we also had cabbage centre grub being mentioned in our landscapes. I have to admit that I wasn't really expecting last year to have had so many reports of caterpillar species, because 2024 had a very dry summer, and same as 2025, we've had a very dry summer, and I was expecting not to see so many caterpillars in our landscape. If we also look at those 300 reports, 50 of them were of red-legged earth mite causing damage. We actually had reports of red-legged earth mite damage mainly in the southern parts of our broadacre growing regions. as well as combined with 30 reports of lucerne flea damage. The lucerne flea did catch quite a few agronomists and growers out because crops were quite well established and we had significant damage from lucerne flea. If we look back at the red-legged earth mites were quite damaging because their peak hatching coincided with crop germination, or in some cases it was the second generation of red-legged earth mites that were causing damage to crop germination, and we had a mixture of spray failure reports as well as issues with just not being able to control the subsequent hatchings of red-legged earth mite. So we'll talk a bit about that later. Well, what are we going to expect for 2025? The issue with red-legged earth mites and lucerne flea is that they will be present in the paddocks they were in last year. It comes down to what was present in your paddocks in spring is going to be there this autumn. We've had an early break in some parts of our landscape combined with a green bridge. If that green bridge isn't controlled and we've got warmer winter growing conditions, we can expect things to have a faster life cycle. And what we did find a lot last year was canola, especially with ring barking and not being able to find the pest that it was. All I can suggest is if you can't find the pest, put a pitfall trap in the ground and see what you can catch. It's really difficult to spray if you don't know what it is. Let's not get caught out. Please use the red-legged earth mite hatching tool. It will predict when the hatch date will be based on whether temperature and rainfall conditions have been met. To date, we have not had red-legged earth mites hatching across the state. The conditions for hatching have not been met. Last year, the app was tested and we did have growers and agronomists confirming that the hatch date, even though it had been what they thought was too dry for red-legged earth mites to hatch, they did actually hatch. So please check that hatching date. And if we actually look at what the average hatch dates are for the state, and we look at, say, somewhere like Esperance, so we're expecting, based on average conditions, that red-legged earth mites will hatch between the 23rd and 29th of April in Esperance. At East Pingelly, 2nd to the 4th of May, and the further north we go, the later the hatch date. So something like Dandaragan really is a late May, 19th of May hatching date. What does that mean? It means that to get an accurate hatch date, please go to the hatching tool. We expect that the crops that are gone in the ground now will be outgrowing red-legged earth mite damage. However, last year we had red-legged earth mites hatching in crops that we considered to be quite advanced, and their numbers actually retarded crop growth. So please monitor and please look at the hatch date. We will again be looking at resistance in red-legged earth mites. So bear in mind that we do have red-legged earth mites that are resistant to synthetic pyrethroids and to organophosphates. So if we look at these maps on the left-hand side, we've got the circles in the blue being susceptible and the circles in orange being resistant. So on the left, we've got quite a number of areas in our broadacre growing areas that are populations of red-legged earth mites that are resistant to organophosphates. On the right, we have, you can see the similar map showing synthetic pyrethroid resistance. You can see that synthetic pyrethroid resistance is quite widespread. However, we still are having populations where we are getting organophosphate and synthetic pyrethroid resistance being found in the same populations. And last year, we really didn't find many mite populations that were not cross-resistant. So we are finding cross-resistance throughout our broadacre growing regions, and that's just something to consider, that you do need to look at what your resistance profile is. And the good news is we are undertaking resistance testing. And just bear in mind that where the red-legged earth mites were in spring last year, they will be there again this year. So if you had spray failures last year, please consider getting them tested. And if you struggled to control them just bear in mind that Receptor does now have, which is diphenthyrone, does have a permit for use in cereals. So there is a two-pronged approach. We are undertaking some more research on managing red-legged earth mite resistance, and there are quite a few documents on how to manage them. So please do look at the GRDC and DPIRD web pages. Lucerne flea last year really just caused extensive damage. You can see that by this established cereal crop on in the picture, which the lucerne flea just stripped the chlorophyll off, and that did retard crop growth. Please monitor your paddocks that you've got a historical issues with lucerne flea. We will be reporting in PestFacts where lucerne flea are being found, and we are working towards creating an app which will tell you the predicted hatch dates for lucerne flea, because lucerne flea hatch from eggs that are coated in clay after the opening rains in autumn, and it can be a little patchy as to where that occurs in a paddock. So do keep that in mind. And the other issue that we've got is that we do have a green bridge present right now. Most farmers are out there controlling it, so we expect that that's not going to be a host for many of our beetle pests. However, what we are finding is that weevils such as Desiantha weevil do have a broader host range, and they do prefer some of the broadleaf weeds. So if you did have a population of broadleaf weeds in paddocks in the previous year, you may still have a problem this year. So even though you don't have a green bridge and you've controlled everything, our beetles survive hot, dry summers quite nicely. And so do slugs. So the number of people last year that told me they expected the hot, dry summer to control their slugs, look, that didn't happen. In parts where you are seeding canola and it is been moist enough for it to grow, and you've got history of slugs, bait straight after seeding, because slugs don't mind if the days are dry. If the nights are moist, they'll still be active and you should still be able to find them. Right now, I am getting lots of questions from agronomists, mainly in the southern parts of our state, as well as north of Perth, who have experienced snails for the first time and are really trying to figure out how much mortality a hot, dry summer has caused to our snails. Bear in mind, just because it's been hot and dry, it doesn't mean it's killed all your snails. If you are struggling to find them and you can't find them under green plant material, so they'll be under weeds, it probably does mean that the measures you put in place last year have dropped the population down. The issue is, has it dropped the population enough to stop crop damage? And that's the only thing you can do is monitor. With snails, baiting straight after seeding or as the crop emerges doesn't always stop crop damage, so you need to be monitoring early. The good news is that the Stirlings to Coast have got a project looking at timing your baits to kill the snails before they lay eggs, so you can suppress the population for next year. So what they're looking at is measuring the albumin gland in snails. So you can see here on the left, there's a small gland, and on the right, it's quite enlarged. Trying to bait them before the gland gets big and produces the albumin for the eggs. They are going to be producing an interactive map showing you what they're finding throughout the landscape. So if you've got snails, check out the map. If you don't have snails, that's great. It doesn't mean that you aren't going to have an issue, because we do find that people who don't have snails may not have looked in their paddocks, or alternatively, they're present at really, really low levels and aren't causing an issue yet. So you do need to be vigilant about snails. And about our fly in, fly out. With warmer winter growing conditions, we can expect more insects to turn up, and our aphids will have a faster life cycle. So we do have something such as green peach aphid, which in 2024, I really didn't expect to see any green peach aphid in our landscape because we had such a dry summer. We've again had an extremely dry summer. I am finding that green peach aphid are quite well adapted to flying in and breeding up when conditions are warm. So bear in mind that once you see a infestation of aphids on your plants, it's too late to control for virus. There will be reports happening in PestFacts. Diamondback moth, again, it's the warmer conditions that we expect will lead to their build-up in crops. Last year, they occurred quite early and persisted. We are going to be giving reports in PestFacts about what we're finding. So do keep an eye out on PestFacts. However, it's the native budworm that I'm most concerned about because we're finding more and more early flights occurring into our broadacre growing regions. And from the maps that Ian put out, you'll have seen that there was widespread rain events in our non-agricultural areas. This will have bred the budworm up, and we do expect that they have built up in number and we will see movement in. So please keep a lookout on PestFacts. There are a number of sentinel sites located throughout our broadacre growing regions where we will be reporting. So pretty much the only thing you can do is target your monitoring and bear in mind that the warmer winter temperatures will mean that we are going to see our pests basically having faster life cycles, and that means building up in higher numbers. So just keep monitoring and keep an eye on PestFacts. Over to you, Andrea.
I'm going to talk about the green bridge and the disease outlook for this season. What we saw in 2024, well, basically this slide shows you all the surveillance sites that we had a look at in our DPIRD crop survey team across WA. So more than 400 reports were made, and basically in barley we had the usual suspects crop up. In the higher rainfall areas we had net blotches and then spot form net blotch throughout the whole state. In wheat there was that yellow spot nodorum complex that we get, and in canola blackleg was the dominant disease. But what we saw that was probably a little bit out of the usual and worth mentioning is that we had a lot more scald in crops last year. So nearly 60% of crops had scald at some level in them. So not all of it was reached a threshold of where damage would be caused, but it's definitely worth keeping an eye out for. The good news with scald is that if you're applying a fungicide to control net blotches, then it really controls the scald quite nicely as well. But perhaps if you're growing something like Neo, which tends not to have much in the way of net blotch, you might want to keep an eye out just to make sure that there is no scald in and around the crop. We also saw a lot more canola blackleg in the northern regions last year, and because blackleg is a stubble-borne disease, that means that the disease will be still on those stubbles from last year and it will develop, and it's possible that crops that are planted adjacent to the stubble will also be under pressure and worth having a look out. Here's some symptoms. If you're not sort of up with blackleg because it's not normally in your area, have a bit of a read about it, get to know it a bit more. We also saw barley loose smut in some varieties last year, and wheat flag smut, as Ian sort of showed with this, what happened last year. It was very warm and flag smut took advantage of that. If it's going to be warmer start again, as the models are predicting, well, that's going to play into a flag smut's hands as well, because that enjoys the warm conditions. But all the smuts are treated pretty simply, just use a registered seed dressing and you shouldn't have any problem. In some areas we also saw Lipin's sclerotinia at quite high levels, especially in the north once it did start raining, but in other areas as well. And that's because this disease does appear to be quite susceptible to that basal form of sclerotinia, where it infects the stem from the ground up, basically. So the green bridge risk for WA this year is pretty variable. Most of WA had very low levels of summer rainfall, And that's great because, you know, the older a plant is, the more disease it tends to carry, and it, you know, increases that load and infects other volunteers and becomes a bit of a multiplication process. However, 3 to 4 weeks ago, we did have those good rains in the Great Southern and through around Mount Barker. And so there are plants down there that do need to be controlled. The sooner the better. As I said, the older they get, the more disease they get. So please, if you can do a knockdown or put some sheep onto them and graze them nice and tightly, that would be good. If you've got nematodes in a paddock, controlling your green bridge can also be advantageous, because those nematodes will be out looking for plant roots to feed on. And if you knock them down or knock down the plants and kill them, potentially starving out the nematodes. Okay, if we look underground for a second there, it's less good news. The dry summer actually increases the risk of rhizoctonia and crown rot. Now, rhizo is probably a bit too late to be swapping out of a problem paddock, changing the rotation at the last minute. But what you can do is prioritise the sowing of those paddocks, because if you sow when it's warm and moist, then the roots and the plant are growing quickly. The roots go down through that rhizo layer nice and fast, and it gives rhizo less opportunity to infect those plant roots and damage them. Whereas if you leave that paddock to last, because it is the rhizo paddock, you risk the seedlings trying to germinate when it's a lot colder and that growth is slowed, and that actually gives rhizo the edge. If you've got a problematic paddock, there's also in-furrow and seed treatment options you might want to have a bit of a look at. In terms of crown rot, unfortunately, if we get a wet start, we do expect to see high levels in cereal crops this year. There's not a lot in our arsenal against crown rot. It's carried on the stubble. That's the inoculum. You can burn. It's not very popular in my neck of the woods, that's for sure, because of erosion risk. And burning, while it can reduce inoculum loads, it won't completely eliminate crown rot, because the crown tends to survive anyway. So about the only product or only tool that we have is to use something like the recently registered seed dressing Victrato. Speaking of tools, I really wanted to touch on the BioScout as a way of you having a bit of a look of what's happening around the place. So last year, about 20 of these units was installed around WA grain belt, and they're pretty simple. There's a solar panel that picks up creates power for the unit. There's an air intake system, and that sucks in air, takes a photo, and a very clever computer has been taught how to assess or identify some disease spores and to take a photo and to count them, basically. So at the moment, it's only doing 5 of the spores that we, that are relative to our crop diseases. First one's canola blackleg. Here's a photo of some blackleg spores for you. And the second is powdery mildew. It counts all mildews, because no one, man or machine, can tell the difference between wheat mildew and barley mildew. But if conditions are right for one, they're generally right for the other disease. And botrytis spores are counted. So botrytis is a family that causes a couple of different diseases. One of the diseases is in your pulses, so it causes botrytis grey mold or BGM, and the other is chocolate spot. That's a botrytis disease. BioScout also has a look for rusts and can identify them, help give you the heads up for what's happening around there, and alternaria, which is probably really only a minor issue at this stage on some canola crops. But if you want to go to BioScout, just do a bit of a search for it. And there are all sorts of outputs you can have a look at. And you can also sign up. And this is one of the outputs. So you sign up, you create yourself a little account, and then what you can do is have a look for the sites you want to have a look at. Down the bottom here, I've got Bulga, Cascade, and Kendenup. This is the graph where I can select what period I want to have a look at the spores for. So this is running from mid-February to yesterday. And we've got the concentration of spores, and it uses a simple traffic light system for numbers, and when disease risk is basically moving into this red area, it's higher. So these are cereal powdery mildew, and although we know that some of the Great Southern has had rain, Cascades had a little bit, but there are some, cereal mildew spores still getting around. So that sort of reiterates that everyone needs to be on the ball when it comes to the Green Bridge. We don't want to just leave those volunteers there, even though we have had a relatively dry summer in most areas, because there are always a few that seem to escape and produce. In contrast, if we have a look at this slide, this is the blackleg, and you can see that there is basically nothing happening. Now, that's because blackleg is a disease that needs quite a bit of wetting up on the stubble, and it's a stubble-borne disease, unlike the mildew, which is a Green Bridge disease. So we're not surprised at this point that there are no spores. And if you are interested in blackleg, and you at this point in the season, you'd be better off looking at the DPIRD spore forecast or sporicle for blackleg, because that will give you an output based on location, rainfall, and the seeding date of when you put your canola in. So here we go. Here's the blackleg spore forecaster on the website. It can help you decide whether or not you do need that 4 to 6 leaf spray. It tries to anticipate, uses a model so that it knows when the canola blackleg matures on the stubble and is released in all the rainfall, or each time it rains, and then it looks out and tries to predict in 4 to 6 leaves time whether you'll be at risk or not. But having said that, if you've used Saltro on your canola seed, you really shouldn't need a 4 to 6 leaf spray. There's something going on if you do, and you need to probably look at rotation or other tools to work it out. Another forecasting tool is the Black Spot Manager. If you've got field peas, that's an SMS alert for when the risk levels change. And I encourage you all to go to the PestFacts WA. That just brings together so much information. It's really handy. You've seen Sveti with the maps of last year, as well as, the in-season newsletter, and you can report on the app and help contribute yourself. So key points are to control the Green Bridge sooner rather than later in that southwest corner of the grain belt. Prevent your smuts with a seed treatment. Look at your rhizo paddocks and get them in early. Have a bit of a play with a few tools, particularly if you're interested in something like your blackleg 4 to 6 leaf spray. And finally, surveillance is a bit of a team effort. And, we looked at sort of over 400 paddocks last year, but if we could get all of you to have a look and keep your eyes out and let us know when you see something unusual, we'd just magnify that 100-fold. We're always happy to speak to you, and symptoms do differ in the field. We know that. And something like barley, where there are also a lot of non-disease symptoms that pop up, send us a photo and we'll get back to you. And I'm just spruiking a few workshops as well that we're having. Okay, thank you, Cindy. That's me done.
Thanks very much, Andrea. And that brings us towards, I'll just bring up my new slides. And that brings us to our final slides of the webinar. As mentioned, feel free to check out our PestFacts map and download our free reporter app if you haven't already. And that brings us to the question and answer session. If I'll just get my presenters to turn on their microphones. Thank you very much, everyone. Where we went a little bit over, but I hope that we've delivered a lot of really helpful content for you. We did have a lot to say. There is lots happening, and we've got a massive grain belt. Very quickly, we do have some questions that have come in. So let's delve in. Svet, where can Argos get instructions for making a pitfall trap? This might be answered already. Oh, fantastic. You've already answered that. Please feel free to go into the comments section to get that link from Svet on getting a pitfall trap. But basically, you get a cup, dig a hole in the ground so the top is level with the soil surface, and put in 5 to 10 mils of water and make sure you regularly check it. Is that correct, Svet?
Yep, that's right. And there's a link there to the PestFacts article.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Svet. And I believe the second question was Ian. Meredith has already answered. The question was, Ian, what were the main differences between this year's seasonal forecast compared to 2024? Meredith has already started the reply saying that same as last year in terms of warmer temperatures, rainfall. Ian will let you know more. So Ian, would you like to say in terms of rainfall, what's going to be the main difference between this year and last year?
Last year you had a dry start to the season, which the models did expect, and they got that bit right. The winter was more or less close to normal, slightly wetter. So the model performance, some of them got that, some didn't, sort of thing. The other story from late last year was that they tended to keep the spring and summer wetter than it actually was. So a mixed set of performances. This year, the rain we've had already has meant we've got a really big geographical difference between the north and the south. So that's a bit we've talked about before. And in that regard, the models have done less well at picking those sorts of regional differences. So they're sort of, if you're up in the north, you'll say, yes, they've done a really good job. But if in the south, they'll say, no, it's been wet. So it's a mixed performance thus far. But the difference, I guess, is that there was in most places a dry start, like there was little rain before the season started. This year, of course, for the south, there is. So we've already got a different year from what we had last year.
Thank you so much. And if you think of a question after today's webinar, don't panic. Please just email us and I'll forward it to the relevant presenter to follow up. Our recording will be on the DPIRD YouTube channel, so keep an eye out. We'll get that uploaded shortly. And please keep an eye out for us at DPIRD Broadacre. Look for the hashtag PestFacts WA. We are regularly posting on there what's happening during the season and directing to relevant information. And that brings us to the very end of our webinar. I'd like to thank you all very much to our attendees. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to thank my presenters, Ian, Svet and Andrea, for sharing all your expertise with us. And I'd like to thank Jeanette for being my co-host behind the scenes. And we'll say goodbye for now. And we hope that everyone has a fantastic day. And we hope to hear from you soon. Goodbye, everyone.